Hi, everyone. I'm Laura DeFranco, the CEO of Brave Healer Productions, where we have a mission to change the world one brave word at a time around here. And today we're celebrating the release of an upcoming book called Sacred Death 25 Tools for Caregivers. This is a project led by Hemali Vora, and I really wanted to start off today by giving Hemali a huge thank you. Hemali, thank you for your vision for this book. We wouldn't be here without you and your beautiful mission to help people talk about and understand death in a very different and more powerful and impactful way. This was a brave project to take on and lead. And I'm speaking for all of our authors. We're so honored to be a part of it. So thank you. And here to help me with this very important and powerful discussion that we're going to have today are some of the authors of this amazing collaboration. Welcome, ladies. How are you doing today?
Hi.
Hello, wonderful.
You guys are so awesome. You guys, I have Robin Friend here, and she serves as a healing artist, medium, and soul work priestess, offering an array of products and services, including interactive workshops, intention products, intuitive consultations, and sacred ceremonies. Sherry Burns is an end-of-life doula practicing in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she companions, is that the right word? Clients during, such a great word, Sherry. She companions clients during their end of life journey and works on state legislation to modernize laws governing the funeral industry. Whoa. Esther Reyes is a Dominican American beach lover, mother, and writer who helps entrepreneurs communicate their unique message through copy that connects and who finds a way to dance every day. Yes, yes, yes. Stephanie Urbina Jones is a singer, teacher, preacher, and midwife, guiding folks on their journey of self-discovery, healing, and transformation, empowering those who seek to live a life of passion, purpose, and personal freedom. If y'all don't feel the power in this room right now, seriously, like, come on. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited to have this conversation, you guys. Robin, start off this party. Tell us about this beautiful chapter that you wrote.
So, chapter 15, holding space during death, processing your feelings while empowering others to process their own. It's my personal story for my experience with the transitioning of my father this past Christmas Eve. He was a wonderful, vibrant person that everyone called Pops, and we shared the same birthday. And what I did not expect is that it would be as challenging as it was for me to release those feelings and support my family at the same time. So it's my journey and how I was able to come to the other side of accepting the emotions that I was going through while working with others as well.
I mean, that's a lot of juggling. This topic came up in another interview, and it's so interesting to hear you bringing it up again. We are doing a lot when we're trying to process our own stuff, but we're also taking care of people. Tell me more about that.
Yes, when you have parents, he left the wife behind, he left my siblings behind. And then I also have my own children. So, and even more so, we shared the same birthday. So it was a major shift for me. And acknowledging that it's okay to receive those feelings. It's okay to take a moment to allow it to surface. The greatest part was I would find myself not receiving what I was feeling. It was as if he hadn't even gone anywhere because I was so wrapped up in being present for everyone else that I wasn't present for myself. And I had to begin a process in saying, my father died. My father died, and really processing and accepting and allowing that energy to flow through and out of my cells. My father died. My father died. And just being patient with myself was also a big, important piece, which allowed me to also be patient for others as they process their emotions.
I mean, y'all have heard the idea of self-care, put that oxygen mask on first, but this idea in the end of life process when it's a loved one and you're moving through grief and the healing process for yourself, and you have the responsibility of helping others do the same thing. It almost feels impossible saying that out loud, those two things at once, but we do it every day. It just seems to me that this piece of self-care is so incredibly important,
And
right?
indeed, we, I love to call it soul care because we really want to care for our souls and listen to the needs of our souls. We often don't get a chance to stop and pause for that.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you all for stepping up in a way that you shared the authentic story, really offering your heart and souls to the reader. And you guys know that I have the mission to, where you carried from the story down into a practical experience that they could practice, a tool, a strategy, a lesson, something that you use, very powerfully on your own healing journey. And you guys did this so brilliantly. It really takes some skill because you all are master teachers and you do this with clients and people all day long. But to be able to write it in words in a way that the reader could have that experience it takes some skill. So I thank you all for doing that so brilliantly. So Sherry, talk to us about your beautiful chapter.
Hi, thanks, Laura. So chapter 6, the title is Listening and Watching for Mystical Signs from the Other Side. This is a topic that's just really near and dear to me because over the years I've had increasing numbers of encounters, shall we say, with entities from the other side. I've witnessed hospice patients, my doula families having similar experiences, and I just think it's so important to heighten our awareness of them. So if you're a caregiver accompanying someone on their end of life journey, it's such an emotional time. And then not only is it emotional, but it's very physically demanding. There's a lot of demands on you just to manage all the things that have to be managed with accompanying someone. Um, and so certainly our loved ones are there to support us. But if we can tune in to these entities that are on the other side that care about us so much and want to give us support, we can find a whole different level of insight and experience in this journey. So in my chapter, I talk about different ways that these entities can manifest their messages, such as dreams, synchronicities, actual visions, and voices. And I kind of tell a different story of each one of different experiences I've had or watched other people have. I also include some information on how to start interpreting some of these signs, especially if you're a person who gets a lot of messages through dreams. They can be so symbolic that it's just like, what did that mean? You wake up in the morning and you're like, what was that? So it's kind of very high level, but I do provide some questions you can ask yourself to help start teasing that meaning apart and arriving at what it is that these entities are communicating with you. So just to explain entities just for a moment. So there are a lot of spirits on the other side, our ancestors, loved ones who've passed, ascended masters, bodhisattvas. They are all there with us and for us. And so that's why I think it's so important on this life journey to tune into them and to position ourselves to be open to hearing their messages so that we can take advantage of their support and their humor and their wisdom to guide us along the way.
Man, Sherry, I'm telling you, this is a whole education I wished I had had as a kid, right? And I didn't, in my journey, I didn't learn some of these things until much, much later. But what I wanted to comment on there was I love the signs from the universe, and I'm used to animals coming into my world and magic angel numbers showing up. Like right now it's 1111, and just some other things like that. But what I'm hearing from your chapter are these ways in the end of life, when you are curious about signs and things happening around you. This is a whole nother world for this.
Right. And so there's the person who's transitioning and all the different experiences they have, because they quite often have visitations from their loved ones on the other side. In terms of archetypes, those are called psychopomps, which is a really weird word, but those are your loved ones who've transitioned to the other side and have come to greet you at the veil and to walk you over. So it's just, like I said, I feel like my chapter is like scratching the surface. There's centuries of people who've read or and studied and written about these topics, but there's just a wealth of resources and love and care and support available to us, either while we're transitioning or while we're accompanying someone who's transitioning. And to go through that experience without that support, to me, it just feels like you're only getting like the tip of the iceberg of the whole experience. Like, why not engage in it fully, spiritually, psychologically, and take advantage of all the support that's there?
Yes, no doubt. You guys, we're changing the grief process with this book. We're changing what's possible in the process that we were all taught should go a certain way or has gone a certain way for us in the past. And I just feel such incredible awe, but also some responsibility in this book, right? And again, just going to thank you again for taking you all do this. You walk your walk every single day. You take responsibility for the energy you bring to the world and the education and the courage you are doing it with to have these kinds of conversations. Thank you for that. I love playing in the sandbox with you guys. Esther, talk to us about your amazing chapter.
Chapter 13, which happens to be my number. Healing after loss, how forgiveness leads to self-love and inner peace. It started with losing a marriage while my husband was still with us, and losing so much more after that. I've gotten to a point where it was so easy to tell the story because of what I received in the end. And what I understood through my journey was forgiveness. Forgiveness for others, in deep down forgiveness, where it's complete forgiveness. Forgiveness for yourself, which took me a long time to get here. To get to a point where I could love myself before loving anyone else was, well, I just feel at awe. I felt that the passing of my husband was my fault, which it wasn't, obviously. But at the time, I wrapped myself in the blame. And after that, a few years after, I lost my son. And again, I wrapped myself in the blame. So it took me a long time and a long list to forgive. But inner peace and self-love is really possible. I am proof of it. But I feel honored to be able to share this story. Thank you.
I think a few of us joked at one point about you guys are going to need to invest in the 3-pack of the Kleenex before you grab this book. But what a beautiful way to be, to be reading these particular stories. The forgiveness is such a big topic, Esther, and such a journey in and of itself, right? What else do you want to say about that specifically?
Part of my tool that I provided includes intentional movement. You have to move your body. You have to, with intention, find a way to dance, exercise, walk. You need to. And that has made a huge difference in everything that I've done and everything that has come from that. But that is an awesome place to start, planting a seed. Move your body, find the right tune and dance.
I love that. I resonate with it. A lifelong athlete here. And there was a point in my journey where I realized that that was a survival tool for me and my mental, emotional, and physical self, all the selves in there, needed to move. And I use it as a tool unapologetically. especially in weeks that I'm grumpy. I usually warn the people in my house, if you guys see that I'm grumpy, tell me to move. Tell me to go exercise, tell me to, and I'm forgetting, don't let me forget. But that is beautiful, a beautiful one. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you.
Stephanie, tell us about the beautiful chapter that you wrote.
Well, I had the honor of writing chapter 4, Midwifing Miracles and Messengers of Love. And this story starts when I was 4 years old, and it begins with the passing of my abuelo, my grandfather, who was my person, and the experience of that as a child, and the desperation that I felt and that I didn't understand for 30 years, that was trapped in my body, this grief that had no way out. And it covers the cosmic breadcrumbs that were like diamonds in the road along the way, that were messengers of love, even while I carried so much depression, and a longing for death that I didn't understand until I was midwifing my abuelita, my grandmother, to the other side, and had this profound sacred experience. And truly, in that moment of walking with her between the worlds, truly learning how to live. And that same commitment to death then became my commitment to life, and just in the last 15 years. So, and the tool that I offer is this experience of creating altars wherever you go, in every way, carrying a picture, creating altars in your home. I travel a lot, so I have a traveling altar, and it's my way of communion and communication with my ancestors, who I feel in contact with at all times.
I loved how you wrote about that, because before I read that chapter, I only was thinking it had to be a big stationary thing. And you kind of broke out my mold of thinking of how I could create that no matter where I was. So like, give us an example of a miniature version that you've done.
So I have, I carry medicine bags, but you can take a Kleenex box, anything that is sacred, you create sacred. And, in my travels, I create, whether it's stones or coins or mementos that remind me, and that I hold sacred and into my heart. And I think about my ancestors, and then they represent that. And when I need connection, when I need answers, when I'm longing for that communion, I'll be at the beach, and I'll create an altar on the beach. If I'm, in a hotel room, it's on my side table. So just anywhere. And then of course we have altars all over our home,
Yeah, I love that idea, especially for travel. You're making me think that this is about energy.
Yes.
What do you want to say about that?
Of course, being a musician, energy is everything. But I think that it was really condensed with this experience of midwifing my abuelita to the other side, and literally feeling her spirit, just as in a woman in childbirth can feel the baby, here comes the baby, and they know that that's about to happen. That's the same experience I had with my abuelita, with her spirit coming, and then that labored breathing, and then her release onto the other side. And that energy sustains me, and I can still feel it, at all times. And so it just kind of changed again my relationship with everything.
Y'all are so amazing in the way that you're talking about your experiences. I just want to acknowledge you one more time for being so brilliant and badass. And it takes all of our voices. It takes all of the unique perspectives. And these books have that mission, because there's so many different kinds of people in the world who are going to need to hear your story, right? And the next person is going to need to hear it a little different way. And so That's what I love about listening to you guys talk about your experiences and what you do, and then how you incorporated the tools and the ones that you developed for yourself that are working for you. It's such a gift. It really is. So I'm going to get around to all of you with this next question. Sherry, I'm starting with you though for this. Okay. So we all had a beginning in terms of our childhood about what we remember being told about death, or we had an experience. Everyone's is so different, right? So what do you remember about what you learned about death growing up?
Oh, wow. I think I was on the receiving end of those traditional stories that so-and-so has gone to heaven.
Hmm.
And if you asked a follow-up question like, what is heaven? Then it would be kind of like, well, that's where God is, and it was just, as a small child, you just keep asking more questions till you've exhausted your parents, right? And it's funny, growing up, like, I just felt like every time I turned around, the phone was ringing and some elderly family member who I really did not ever even know had died. Like, I just remember going to a lot of funerals. Um, like I said, I think the main question I was asked is like, where did this person go? Um, and I think I was a little troubled, like seeing the body in the coffin. Like that's can be kind of a frightening experience for a child. Um, I think I'm kind of an extreme introvert, so like I didn't express a lot of my questions or concerns. It was always just kind of like, well, what do you mean so and so died? And the answer was like, he or she's gone to heaven to be with God now. And somehow as this little child, you just are kind of expected to accept that. Um, and unfortunately, I think the world is changing and there's all sorts of wonderful material out now for children to help support them when they experience a death in their family, things that explain like the energy and about how the energy goes on forever. And young children can, I think, are much more capable of understanding those concepts than we give them credit for.
I completely agree with you. I think that the book will change things for parents and coaches and teachers, which of course is going to change things for the kids. And having these conversations is so important. That's what I remember the most, is not having any. just
Right.
being like, come on, Laura, we're going to the funeral. Or, so and so died, this is what's happening. But there wasn't, and I was the same as you, Sherry, introverted and not asking enough questions, even though they might have been in there. I wasn't asking at that point. I think it took me till adult years to ask all the questions, right?
And what struck me as you were talking, Laura, like as an end-of-life doula, one of the things that I really try to advocate is a more wholesome and holistic approach to death. That's like, it's the other end of birth. It's going to happen to all of us and everything. But what we experienced as children with kind of getting an inadequate answer, it wasn't because culturally we had a wholesome, holistic approach to death. It was our way of avoiding talking about it. And I think adults had a discomfort with like, why does she keep asking me where grandpa went? And it's just like, they didn't want to talk about it. For one thing, they didn't have the tools. So I'd like to see us like evolve to this next place where we are comfortable talking about it. And it's because we're more integrated with it. We're accepting it. So that we don't have that avoidant silence. But if there's a silence, it's because we are comfortable with it.
Yes, Esther said something about forgiveness earlier, and there was definitely a point where I just realized, you know what, my parents were doing the best they could at the time with the info they had and the upbringing they had.
Right.
And so, let's forgive all of that. And now I get to be on my own curious seeking journey and ask all the questions and do it a little differently for my kiddos, have better conversations. Thank you, Sherry. Stephanie, what do you want to add about that for you in terms of your personal journey with this? Your chapter was about this because you were young. So what else do you want to tell us about what you remember?
I think that the most important thing I want to share is that I love this conversation about being present with the kids and allowing them into the experience and kind of sharing that it is a part of life, just like birth. And, I didn't have that. I didn't have that anyone talking to me about that. And I literally stored that trauma in my body for 30 some odd years until my grandmother's death. And so I think this is such an important subject for children. They can handle it. We need to find the words and the way to communicate to them so that there's not fear, or if there is fear, that it can be talked about.
They for sure can handle it. I want to mention something because you've said it twice about the energy and the trauma being stored in the body. So just speaking to our listeners as I've been a holistic physical therapist for 30 plus years. I'm a myofascial release practitioner. And what I want to tell you guys about, if you're hearing Stephanie say that and you're like, what do you mean it's in my body? So those cells in your body have a consciousness, and trauma is very much an energetic thing that can be lodged in the tissue. And without going into this whole day's worth conversation, right? Because
Right.
we could go there all day. I want the listeners to understand that what she's talking about is sometimes a piece of healing that is missed in terms of the integration of whatever the trauma is. So of course, we're talking about death and dying and these traumas that we have as kids or adults. And we can find the answer to the healing sometimes in the physical tissue. We need very skilled experts to guide that healing journey, right? And you're staring at some of them today, which is why I wanted to bring these books together.
Right. I would love to just add right there. So in my experience, there I was in terror and desperate longing, and that locked into my body, that agreement that he died and that my little child mine, I wanted to die with him. And so I carried that agreement, that filter, for the rest of my life. For 33 years, I had this not date with destiny, but date with wanting to leave at some level locked in my body, until I got to these healing ways that finally released that for me to live.
Which I hope is filling you all with some interesting hope right now about the possibilities for your own healing, right? That's part of what we're here to do today too. Robin, how about you with this same question? What do you remember? What was important to you from what you remember about it?
What I recall most as a child is not understanding why I wasn't as sad as everyone else when a family member would pass away.
I get that.
Yes. And I remember wanting to know what was different about me, that I wasn't grieving in the same way, that I didn't understand the process. So very similar to what you all mentioned, children being involved in the conversation of death and knowing that it is a transitional process, but that we also will experience it different than another, depending on how much energy that we hold in our energetic sphere of that person. We may not experience that grief, that release in the same way that another does. And I never could understand that. I almost thought that there was an issue with me because I grieved more over my dog than I did over my uncle. So that was challenging for me because that conversation wasn't there. And there were moments where I almost forced myself to cry because I thought that there was a difference between me. There was something that was lacking, that I wasn't respecting the fact that this person had transitioned, had left, where others were very distraught. So that is an important conversation, and knowing that we will release in different ways. And sometimes we do hold more energy for another than we would for someone else. And that comes in the form of grief, which is just the release, is our resistance to the release. So.
Love that. How did you know one of my other questions today? So I can't spoil it though. So I'm going to let Esther chime in on this what do you remember question, and then I'm going to pop back to this idea because it's important for me too. I love hearing you talk about that, Robin. Esther, what do you remember about this in your growing up?
The people that passed away as I was growing up were people that were on the island or were away. We weren't even in the same vicinity, but all I remember was my parents leaving. So for me, anytime anyone passed away, oh, my mom and dad are leaving. So it was always an abandonment. Internally, that's what I just associated with. And up until this moment, because listening to this powerful group, you guys have just, there's another book I hear coming. I didn't realize that because I felt abandoned as a child, through not, my parents would return, mind you, but just that moment of abandonment, whatever length of time, I mean, I remember that clearly. I associated that with the death of my husband. I mean, I just felt, wow, he just abandoned us. And his knowledge of knowing that he was passing away slowly and his body was deteriorating and I was unaware made that abandonment even more so. But up until this moment, I did not make that association. So thank you, ladies. My mind is blown. All I'm learning this during this session, I just thank you so much. My heart is just full. So, but for me, it was really the abandonment, interesting enough.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Okay. You guys are the best. Okay, so like there's two questions I have left for you, but I'm going to do something differently because of how you guys are talking about this. So I'm going to riff from what Esther said about the awareness. So she's sitting here having a magical moment of awareness where there's a realization of something in this topic that she's worked years to think about and heal with and all the things, right? And this is how it plays out in my life constantly. Awareness is everything. The practice, the discipline creates magical moments of healing. It gives us the choice to make a decision in either direction. But I'm going to slide into this question starting with Stephanie. And Robin, you're going to be the last one to answer it because you actually asked it a minute ago. Okay. Crazy. But what I want you guys to hear in this last question, and listeners too, is the gift of awareness that the authors are dropping as they're offering to you what is in their heart and soul and minds about these topics. Okay. So here it is, Stephanie. You know, having been on a spiritual and healing journey my whole life, I don't ever actually remember feeling afraid to die. Resonate, Robin? So what that experience is so different for everyone. And that's what Robin was also saying earlier. So what was that like for you, Stephanie? And talk to us about the awareness practice that allowed you to understand even what was going on with that. Either being afraid or not being afraid, or how it shifted, or whatever it was for you.
Well, I had this strange, on one hand, I wanted to die for a long time. I had this sacred longing, but I didn't understand why, because I had a beautiful life. And then on the other hand, I was afraid to die, because I had trauma in my body. So I was always like putting on the brakes, afraid to die. And then again, midwifing my grandmother to the other side and feeling this experience of her spirit leaving her body and feeling strangely jubilant, feeling connected to the joy. And then after that, feeling, again, connected to my ancestors almost at all time with my thoughts, with my energy, with my intention. This is just a pathway that is just I think we all have access to. So now I'm not afraid to die. I really understand that passageway for me. And that's part of the way I live every day.
So I'm writing down something that you just said, and I have been writing questions as they've come up with you all. Nuggets. Oh man, this is a big one. Are you connected to the joy in death? That's a big ass question. So many of us were taught to not be. In fact, we were taught it was bad. Oh my goodness, this is a game changer. Total game changer. Yeah, thank you. You might find yourself on a graphic soon, Stephanie, with that one. So Esther, how do you want to take this one on? That fear, the lack of it, how it shifted?
I will tell you, I relay it back to first the passing of my husband and my Latin heritage. There was absolutely no celebration allowed. Even in the midst of his friends talking about him in such a positive, uplifting way, it was frowned upon. And the morning that I was expected, the time that I was expected to mourn, well, it was too much. I had 3 small children. I couldn't see myself putting that much energy in something that I wanted to celebrate him. I wanted to say, look, you know what? He did this, this, and that. And it's so great because now I do it with my girls and they love it. And I'll be telling them, your father would say this and would do it this way. And oh no. But when I was mourning at the time, it was frowned upon. The whole celebration, the whole celebrating life. I was expected to mourn 80 days, just wearing black and limited diet and limited activity. And yeah.
I wrote this another one for you all. How much time were you expected to mourn the death of a loved one?
Well,
what a rule that we set for our families and communities when we do that. And isn't that such an individual process that nobody can set a rule for? Exactly. I mean, yeah, wow, Esther, thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay, Sherry, how do you want to add to this?
So one of the things that struck me was when Robin was talking about when she was little, and it was like trying to understand like everything you saw going on around you. And that's kind of what I remember as far as with the deaths and the funerals that I experienced as a child, was seeing my parents, my grandparents so upset and so distraught that I found that frightening. That became my overriding experience of the whole thing. Was it's so frightening to see your parents like lose it and just be overwhelmed with grief and to be crying, and that frightened me a lot. So that was kind of a lot of my memories of that. And also just like working with families as a doula, like seeing, like I'll notice like children, so similar to what I felt when I was a child, is you see these little children looking up at their role models with this puzzled look, like what's happening and how am I supposed to be responding? And it reminds me of a friend of mine who has I think his daughter was 4 when their dog died. And so the husband and wife are crying. They're very upset that their dog died. And the little girl's looking at both of them. And so then she just started whimpering, like acting crying. But that was such an example to me of how these young children, like they're for them, it's all learning and like studying these role models they have and trying to understand like what is happening. Should I be crying? Why don't I feel sad? Why it's scaring me that my mom and dad are sad. So I think it's important, like as we go through these experiences and we do have young children around, to help support them that way, because if they haven't experienced it much before, it can be really overwhelming to see all this emotionalness, and it can create this trauma. And certainly the whole idea of celebrating someone's life is going to be the last thing they're going to feel about the whole experience.
Celebration came up in another interview, and I love when that comes up because that's another option. And sometimes we don't even get the choice to think about options because we're taught certain things. And, and isn't there a balance? There is a balance between honoring all the feelings and emotions and then practicing an awareness that gives you a choice to celebrate also. We
Right.
get to have both things here if we choose.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happened, so when my birth father died 4 years ago, there were small children in the family, like around 2 to 5. And he died at home. And at that point, I was studying to be a death doula. So I really encouraged the family to keep him at home. So we kept him at home overnight, and we spent the next day with him. And I think one of the most special things I witnessed was watching the children. Like at first they came in and they were kind of scared, but then they kind of overcame that fear, and pretty soon they were running in and out. They were laying flowers all over him.
Mhm.
They were drawing pictures and notes. And by the time we did finally let the funeral home come pick him up, he was covered in flowers and pictures. And I just thought, how much more wholesome can it be than that they got past the way, they worked through the fear, and were just really able to show their expressions of love. That was just something I'll never forget.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that scene. What a nice one in this whole topic of death. Okay, Robin, you're going to close us out today, and I'm going to just frame this from what you said earlier. You were like, why am I different that I am not feeling what everyone else is feeling? I would question myself in very similar ways. Shouldn't I be devastated right now? Why is the Hallmark commercial about the dog dying, affecting me worse than my, yeah. So go for it, Robin.
I remember very clearly not having a fear of death as a child. I felt very connected with it. That it just seemed like it was a process, even though I didn't know exactly what it was. And there were even moments where I would say, I feel that someone very close to us is going to die. And the only moment that I began to feel like something was wrong with death was when I was told not to say that, told not to mention that. That's not okay. And many children have these experiences where they are visited by loved ones, as we mentioned before, or they just have a knowing. And it made me think that, oh, I'm never to ever talk about death, and that shut down process. So then I created this story of how I am supposed to process death. And that story was levels and levels of conditioning, that layers of conditioning, and then to have to work through that along with my emotions became very challenging, although it is something we can all move through. So by having these conversations early with children, with family, by really connecting all together, we really bring forth how beautiful the process is.
Yes, nice airplane. That crazy sound. That's like, I love those noises actually. They feel powerful to me. Thank you for that. So I want the listeners today to understand that you guys have a really incredible opportunity to continue this conversation. So Hemali has created the Sacred Death Community Group on Facebook. Hop over there. Okay, I've got you linked up in the show notes, because you guys can tell that any one of the questions I asked the authors today, we could have been here for hours all day discussing all of these wonderful, juicy things. And it is what is going to create the awareness and the healing and the change and the shifts and the knowing that you are craving about this topic. So pop over there. It's an incredible opportunity to be with all of our authors and ask them questions about what you've heard on the interviews and about what you're going to be reading in their chapters, right? It's pretty cool. So to all of you, thank you so much for what you do in the world. authors, and for being here today to share it with everybody. Thank you so much. Listeners, don't forget, you can join us on August 17th, 10 a.m. Eastern. We're going to have a little live stream book launch party on the Brave Healer Productions Facebook page. And all of our authors are going to be there, and they're going to share their wisdom with you. We're going to have some pretty cool giveaways for our book purchasers that day. And of course, if you're listening to this after August 17th, well, get on over to Amazon, because that means the book is ready for you and you can grab your copy. And don't forget to hop yourself into that Facebook group as well. The authors' websites are hooked up in the show notes too. So take the next step in their worlds. If something that they said resonated with you today, go find out more about them and the awesomeness that they are up to in the world. And it is a lot of awesomeness. Lastly, today, I want you guys to remember your brave words will change the world. What if that thing you're still a little afraid to share is exactly what someone needs to hear to change or even save their life? It's time to be brave. See you next time, everybody.
Thank you.